A billionaire drove an excavator through his wall at 6 in the morning. Not a warning, not a notice, an excavator. Through the wall, while he was inside, while his 3-year-old was asleep in the back room. And the man driving it looked him dead in the eyes before he hit. Like he knew exactly whose home he was destroying. Now here's what you need to understand. Kaiven Rho had done nothing. No crime, no grudge, no history with this man. He fixed broken electronics for $30. He kept an open Wi-Fi router so his elderly neighbors could get online. That was the whole life. That was all of it. But someone used that router to leak mafia shipment routes to federal authorities. And left Kaiven's name on it. So when a billion-dollar alpha with a demolition crew came looking for the spy, he found a mute man. A man who cannot speak a single word. And a toddler holding a stuffed wolf. And here is what happens next. That toddler walked straight toward the most dangerous man in the room. No fear, no hesitation, just walked right up to him and held the toy up. And that one moment, that 3 seconds of a child trusting someone who should have been terrifying, changed everything. This is the story of a man who was chosen because he was invisible, who was framed because no one thought he had the power to fight back, who ended an 8-year criminal empire from a borrowed kitchen table. Without saying a single word. Stay with this, because the part that breaks you hasn't happened yet. Chapter 1. The day a billionaire drove through my wall. The first thing Kaiven Rho heard that morning was metal. Not a knock, not a voice. Metal. Against concrete. Against brick. Against everything he spent 4 years putting together inside that apartment on the east end of Delwood Avenue. He was at his workbench, soldering iron in hand. A cracked circuit board from a neighbor's busted radio spread in front of him. The kind of board most people throw away. The kind Kaiven fixes. His left hand moved slow and precise. The way hands move when one wrong touch burns the whole thing. Then the wall cracked. Not a small crack. Not a settling of old foundation crack. The kind that starts at the ceiling and splits down like someone drew a line through the room with a blade. Dust dropped from the gap. White powder. Floating. Kaiven set the soldering iron down. He stood. He looked at the wall. The wall moved again. This time the plaster blew inward. Chunks of drywall the size of dinner plates hit the floor. Concrete powder filled the air so fast the room turned gray. And through the settling cloud, through the torn open side of the building that used to be his living room, came the arm of a machine. Yellow. Industrial. Moving with total intention. A construction excavator. The bucket swung back, braced, then drove forward again. The second impact knocked Kaiven off his feet. He hit the workbench. Tools scattered across the floor. The radio board slid off the edge and shattered on the concrete. He scrambled up, grabbed the doorframe, pulled himself toward the hallway. The noise was a living thing. Metal screaming through concrete. Wiring pulling loose from the walls with a sound like breaking teeth. The window on the far side rattled so hard in its frame it sounded like it was begging. From the back room came a different sound. Small. High. Terrified. Rilo. Kaiven ran. He burst through the hallway door, dropped to his knees on the cracked floor, and pulled the 3-year-old tight against his chest. The child was shaking so hard Kaiven could feel the vibration in his own ribs. A stuffed wolf clenched in both small hands. Eyes huge. Mouth open but no words coming out. Same as Kaiven. No words. Because Kaiven never had any. Not spoken ones. He pressed Rilo into his chest and covered the small ears with his palm. The machine hit again. The building groaned so deep it felt like the floor breathed. Plaster rained from the bedroom ceiling in long sheets. The kitchen cabinet above the sink swung open and a row of mismatched cups fell and smashed on the linoleum. And then it went quiet. The machine stopped. Dust drifted through the demolished wall. Gray light, hanging wire, broken concrete like teeth. And through it all, standing in the gap where the wall used to be, was a man. Tall, broad. Dark suit jacket over a plain black shirt. Dust already settling on his shoulders like he walked through demolitions for a living and didn't mind. He wasn't looking at the building. He was looking at Kaiven, cold, flat, like a man who had decided something long before he arrived. The name Kaiven would learn in the next few minutes was Vadrik Halden, construction tycoon, owner of 6 development companies across 3 states. A man whose photograph appeared in business journals next to words like visionary and relentless. And apparently the man who believed, with complete certainty, that Kaiven Rho deserved to lose the only home he had ever built. The strange part was not that he destroyed it. It was that he thought Kaiven deserved it. The apartment on Delwood Avenue wasn't much. 3 rooms, a kitchenette the size of a closet, a bathroom with a showerhead that ran hot for exactly 4 minutes before going cold. The walls were covered in shelving Kaiven built himself from mismatched wood and salvaged brackets. Uneven lengths, but they held things. Capacitors, resistors, coils of wire in colors that would have looked like art to someone who didn't know what they were for. In the corner near the window, a power strip ran 6 extension cords across the floor to a workbench made from 2 sawhorses and a flat door he found leaning against a dumpster on Mercer Street 3 years back. He'd sanded it himself, cut it to fit, bolted it to the sawhorses with hardware from a liquidation sale. That was the studio. That was the income. That was the thing keeping Rilo fed. People in the building knew him the way people know someone who solves problems without making noise about it. The older woman on the 3rd floor, Mrs. Delvane, brought her daughter's old tablet down when the screen stopped responding. Kaiven fixed it in 40 minutes. She paid him $30 and looked at him like he'd done something close to a miracle. She came back a week later with a busted Bluetooth speaker. He fixed that too. $15. Word spread the way it always does in buildings where nobody has extra money. People on the block stopped throwing broken things away. They knocked on the 2nd floor door. The quiet guy. The one with the toddler. The one who somehow made dead electronics breathe again. It wasn't glamorous work. Late nights. A strain. Fingers burned twice a week by the iron. Cheap noodles from the corner store because protein was expensive and rice was not. Dumpster-pulled parts that still had life in them if you were patient enough to look past the damage. But it was his. Every bit of it. Rilo had a corner by the bedroom window where afternoon light came in warm and gold and long. A small blanket folded on the floor. Foam puzzle tiles pushed together in a rough square. 3 picture books with the corners chewed. They came that way, bought from a resale bin, already loved by someone else before they reached Rilo. That was fine. Love left in things doesn't disappear. It just moves. Kaiven had found that out the hard way. That was the life. Quiet, functional, small enough to hold, enough to keep a child alive and warm and safe. Some nights he sat at the workbench after Rilo was asleep and held a broken thing in his hands and felt something that was close to peace. Not happiness exactly. Not the kind people talk about, but a kind of rightness. The rightness of a purpose that fit exactly the size of the hands holding it. He had never needed to be loud. He had never needed to be seen. He needed to be useful. And he was. That was enough. Hi viewers, if you had to survive with just one skill, completely on your own with 0 outside help, what would that skill be? Drop it in the comments right now. I want to read every single one. Everything worked the way it was supposed to. Until the network started doing things that made no sense. It started 3 weeks before the wall came down. Kaiven had a public Wi-Fi router mounted near the front window facing the street. He set it up 2 years earlier. The building's older residents couldn't afford broadband after the city restructured the low-income access program, and most of them had no idea how to navigate mobile hotspot setups. So he put up a shared connection. Open access. No password. Because what was the point of having something if the people around you were going without? He didn't monitor the traffic heavily. But one Tuesday night he was patching a firmware issue on a second-hand laptop someone had left in the hallway with a note taped to it that said please fix if possible. And the diagnostic screen showed something he hadn't seen before. Massive upload rates. Not streaming big. Different. The kind of upload numbers that meant something was being actively pushed out. Not downloaded. Sent. Encrypted packets. Hundreds of them in rapid sequence. moving in bursts, like someone was pushing data out in deliberate intervals. Kaiven frowned at the screen. He sat with it for a few minutes. He assumed someone in the building had a large file share running, or a VPN doing something heavy, or someone running a gaming server. Something explainable. He closed the window, went back to the laptop. He told himself it was probably fine. Probably someone in the building discovered the shared connection ran faster late at night when everyone else was asleep. Probably someone downloading something large. Movies, software, something ordinary. People with no money get creative about access. He knew that better than most. But the next night the numbers were there again. And the night after that. And on the fourth night at just past 2 in the morning, a black car sat at the curb directly below his window. Engine running. Headlights off. No plates visible from his angle. It sat there for 43 minutes. Kaiven stood at the dark window and watched it. He hadn't turned on any lights. The car didn't move. Then it did. Slow. No rush. Rolling down the block and gone. Kaiven stood at the window a long time after that. His hands weren't shaking, but something in his chest had pulled tight. The way a wire feels when it's carrying more current than it was designed for. Not broken yet, but stressed. He told himself it was nothing, because what else could he do? Survival doesn't leave room for curiosity. He had a child to feed, broken electronics waiting on the bench, a neighbor who needed her coffee maker looked at by Friday. He went to bed. He did not sleep well. The machines arrived at 5:47 in the morning. Not one machine, 3. An excavator. A bulldozer idling 30 feet behind it. A flatbed truck loaded with chain barriers and orange cones already being set out by men in bright vests. The excavator engine was what woke him. That deep diesel rumble that bypasses the ears and registers directly in the chest. He sat up in the dark bedroom. For a moment he didn't move. He just listened. The engine was too big for a delivery truck. Too deep for residential equipment. It had the sound of industrial machinery. The kind built for removing things. Rilo was still asleep in the corner under the window. One arm stretched out. The stuffed wolf somewhere under the blanket. Kaiven moved to the glass carefully. He didn't turn on any lights. The excavator arm was already raised. High, patient, like something waiting for permission. And the man in the cab, the man gripping the controls with both hands, was looking directly at the second-floor window. Directly at Kaiven. Their eyes held for 3 full seconds. Then the bucket came down. That was the last moment of before. Everything that followed was after. Dust. Collapse. Rilo's voice sharp and terrified from the back. And a man in an expensive jacket stepping through the rubble of Kaiven's living room like he was walking into a meeting he had been looking forward to. This man. This cold, expensive, certain man. Vedrik Halden. Who believed, without question, that the man standing across from him in the ruins of a broken apartment had made the worst mistake of his life. Chapter 2. The man with no mercy and the child with no fear. The dust hadn't even settled. Vedrik Halden stood at the edge of where the wall used to be and looked at Kaiven the way men look at problems they've already decided are finished. Still. Certain. Done. Behind him, 2 men in dark jackets moved through the rubble. Pulling at collapsed shelving. Kicking at debris with careful boots. Looking for something specific. Kaiven stood in the hallway doorway with Rilo pressed tight behind him. One small hand gripping the back of Kaiven's knee through the denim. The air tasted like chalk and old wood and something metallic. Every breath pulled grit in. The morning light came through the fresh opening in the building wall, cold and flat and gray, and it made the floating dust look like smoke that forgot to rise. Kaiven's workbench was on its side. The shelving unit that took him 3 weeks to build and bolt properly to the wall had collapsed across the floor like a spine breaking. The components bin had cracked open. Months of sorted parts now spread across rubble. He looked at it, then looked away. Because some things you can only see a piece at a time. The whole picture breaks you. Vedrik walked forward. 3 steps. Deliberate. Like a man measuring ground. You know why I'm here, he said. Not a question. Kaiven shook his head. Don't play quiet with me. Kaiven opened his hands, spread his palms, gestured toward his throat, pointed at his mouth, shook his head again. Vedric's eyes didn't shift, didn't soften, didn't do anything other than stay exactly where they were. My shipment routes were leaked to federal authorities 4 days ago, he said. The data trail leads to a network registered to this building, this apartment, your name on the registration. He said it like each sentence was a nail going into wood. A mute man can still type, he added. The words landed flat. Kaiven turned. He moved to the hallway, grabbed the half-finished cardboard box that had been sitting by the door since Tuesday, waiting to be recycled, pulled the marker from the workbench edge. He wrote fast. I can't talk. Never have. I don't know what routes mean. He held it up. Vedric read it without moving. That's convenient, he said. His voice was completely even. Not mocking, just unconvinced. Kaiven lowered the cardboard, flipped it, wrote on the back. Public Wi-Fi, open network. Anyone in this building or outside it can connect. No password, no filter. He held it up again. Vedric read it. Something moved behind his eyes this time. Small, unwilling. The kind of flicker that happens when a locked door gets tested from the wrong side. Not belief, but something adjacent to doubt. The men behind him kept working. One of them lifted a circuit board from the rubble, turned it over, looked at the handwritten repair tag taped to it, set it down. Another pulled a coil of wire from under a fallen shelf, looked at it, dropped it. Kaiven wrote again. He turned the cardboard sideways to fit more words. I repair electronics for neighbors. $30 for a tablet. $15 for a speaker. That is all I do. Look at this room. He pointed at the debris. Vedric looked. His gaze moved slowly across the room. Saw the workbench on its side. Scattered precision screwdrivers. Resistors and transistors and coils of wire across the floor. A plastic bin cracked open and spilling salvaged USB ports. A spiral notebook, pages splayed open, showing nothing but repair logs. Device models, fault codes, replacement notes in tiny, careful handwriting. Not spy equipment, not server hardware. Repair notes, the notes of someone who did this quietly, daily, for years. Vedric stepped forward, picked up the notebook, held it in both hands. He turned pages. Slowly, he read. The men behind him exchanged a look over his back. Kaiven watched Vedric's face. The certainty was still there, but it had a seam in it now. A crack so small you'd miss it if you weren't watching for it. Vedric closed the notebook, set it on the cleared edge of the overturned workbench. The data came from this network, he said, quieter now. My people don't make tracing errors. He looked at Kaiven. Which means either you did this, or someone used you to do it. That pause after was not silence. It was wait. And before Kaiven could write another word, before he could respond to the small but enormous shift in that sentence, he heard it. Small feet on broken plaster. The sound every parent knows in the back of their spine before they consciously register it. He turned. Rilo had slipped past him in the hallway. 3 years old. Curly hair dusted pale from the ceiling debris. A scuff of white plaster on one cheek. Stuffed wolf dangling from one hand by the ear. The child was walking across the destroyed room, not shuffling, not hesitating, walking, straight toward Vedric Halden. Kaiven's entire body locked. He stepped forward, but the rubble under his foot shifted and he caught the doorframe. Rilo was already there, standing directly in front of the most dangerous man in the room, looking up, the way a toddler looks up at something new. Not with fear but with the open, serious attention of someone filing information away. Vedric looked down. The cold in his face cracked. Not much. Not in a visible, dramatic way. More like the temperature of the room changed by a single degree and you felt it before your mind registered it. Rilo reached out, touched the hem of Vedric's jacket, looked at the fabric, rubbed it between 2 small fingers, let it go, then lifted the stuffed wolf. Extended it toward Vedric. An offering. Or an introduction? Maybe both. Vedrik stared at the wolf. He did not move. One of his men behind him made a sound. Short, low, cut off instantly when Vedrik's head turned 90 degrees. The man found something interesting on the floor. Silence moved back in. Kaiven watched Vedrik's hands. They were loose at his sides, but the fingers shifted once, like they wanted to do something and he hadn't decided what yet. Rilo lowered the wolf, looked up at Vedrik's face for another few seconds with that same open, unbothered expression, then turned around and walked back toward Kaiven. Like the investigation was complete. Report filed. Moving on. Kaiven picked Rilo up and held the child tight against his chest. Rilo's hands went around his neck immediately, small fingers gripping. The stuffed wolf pressed against the side of Kaiven's head. He could feel Rilo's heartbeat, fast, but settling. The way children settle when the person they trust most is holding them. Even when that person is standing in a demolished apartment with nowhere to go. Vedrik watched this. "Who is the child?" he said. His voice was different. Same flat register. Same controlled delivery. But the temperature in it was not the same. Kaiven shifted Rilo to one arm. Reached for the cardboard. Wrote one word. "Mine." Held it up. Vedrik read it. He didn't say anything for a moment. He looked at Rilo. Rilo looked back at him. Same expression. Completely calm. Completely open. Then Vedrik turned to his men. "Stop what you're doing. Pull back to the perimeter." The men stopped, looked at each other, pulled back without a word. Vedrik reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, looked at Kaiven. "I need to make a call. Do not leave." He walked toward the open wall, stepped through. His footsteps on the rubble outside were slow and measured. The sound of his voice drifted back. Low. Controlled. Too quiet to catch the words. Kaiven set Rilo down. He picked up the shattered radio board from the floor. He turned it over in his hands. For days of work. Gone. He set it down carefully, like it still deserved to be handled with care. Even broken. He stood in the middle of the room. The morning came in through the open wall. Cold. Real. He looked at what was left. Rilo walked to the foam tiles near the bedroom doorway. Sat down. Began stacking them again. Like the child had already decided that the day still had to keep going. Kaiven watched that for a moment. Then he picked up the marker. Went to the cardboard. He didn't write anything yet. He just held the marker. And looked at the open wall. At the yellow machine still parked outside. The men in vests. The flatbed truck. And Vedrik standing at the curb with a phone to his ear. The most dangerous morning of Kaiven's life. And it was barely 6 o'clock. Outside, Vedrik ended the call. He stood with his back to the opening for a long time. Then he turned. He stepped back inside. And for the first time since he drove his machine through Kaiven's wall, the Alpha looked confused instead of angry. Chapter 3. What the rubble found. The search took 2 full hours. Vedrik's men moved through every corner of the destroyed apartment with the focused efficiency of people who did this kind of work regularly. They didn't rush. They didn't talk much. They were methodical. They pulled open what was left of the collapsed shelving, turned over the tool bins, shook out the notebooks page by page, checked inside every cracked battery casing stacked near the window, opened every container, unrolled every wire coil, went through the kitchen cabinets, the bathroom cabinet, the space under the bed. Kaiven had moved Rilo to the bathroom, which was the only room the demolition had left intact. He set the child on the closed toilet lid with the stuffed wolf and a handful of foam puzzle pieces he found near the bedroom door. Rilo stacked them, patient, methodical, completely unbothered by the sounds of men moving through rubble in the other rooms. Kaiven came back to the hallway doorway. He watched. The men weren't careless. Every item they picked up was examined, not glanced at. They turned things over, looked at the backs, checked serial numbers on a few of the larger boards against something on a phone screen. They were thorough, and what they found was exactly what Kaiven already knew was there. A bag of capacitors sorted by microfarad, labeled in marker. 16 motherboards with handwritten repair tags. A plastic bin of salvaged USB ports in 3 types. 2 old cellular modems with the cases cracked open for parts. 3 spiral notebooks. 2 electronics manuals with broken spines and bookmarked pages. 1 drawer of precision screwdrivers organized smallest to largest. And a cracked tablet displaying a half-finished circuit simulation. Kaiven had been running to check a component failure pattern on a neighbor's old desktop. No encryption software. No external drives with hidden partitions. No secondary devices. No routing hardware beyond a standard consumer router. No anything that looked like a deliberate intelligence operation. One of the men brought the notebooks to Vedrik. Vedrik was sitting on a cleared section of floor near the open wall. Natural light coming in gray and flat over his shoulder. He read. Slowly. He turned pages. His face didn't change expression, but his eyes moved carefully. Kaiven walked to the workbench. He'd set it back upright earlier. Now he was putting tools back on the surface. Not because he was calm. Because his hands needed something to do, and this was the only option that didn't feel like surrender. Vedrik looked up. These repair logs go back 4 years, he said. Not a question. Kaiven looked at him. Nodded. You've been doing this alone. Another nod. The child too. Kaiven held up one finger. Then pointed at himself. Then made a small gesture in the direction of the bathroom where Rilo was stacking tiles. Just the 2 of them. That's what the gesture said. Vedrik looked at the notebook, turned a few more pages, closed it, held it in both hands. The network trace was clean, he said, not looking up. Whoever sent the data knew how to mask their device signature. Your router was the exit point, not the source. He looked at Kaiven. There's a difference. Kaiven picked up the cardboard. Wrote, I told you. Public. Open. No lock on it. He held it up. Vedrik read it. He set the notebook down. Stood. Walked to the open wall and looked out at Delwood Avenue. The construction equipment was still there. The excavator parked to the side. The flatbed truck. Men in vests standing near the barriers. The block was awake now. People watching from windows across the street. Someone on the sidewalk with a phone raised. Vedrik looked at none of them. He was somewhere else. Then his phone rang. He answered on the second ring. The voice on the other end was loud enough to carry pieces of it across the room. Port 4. Federal presence. 2 hours ago. Another leak. While they were standing here, Vedrik's face didn't change, but his knuckles went white on the phone. He ended the call. Stood with his back to the room. Breathing. Controlled. Like a man whose body had been trained not to show what was happening inside it. His men were watching, waiting. He turned around. He looked at the room, then at Kaiven. The evidence was there in the absence of it. A man running a leak operation doesn't keep repair logs. Doesn't have 16 circuit boards tagged with neighbor names and device models. Doesn't fix a widow's coffee maker for $20 on a Tuesday afternoon. Doesn't raise a toddler in a room full of salvaged wire. Whoever framed Kaiven knew he was clean. That was the entire point. Clean people absorb suspicion without generating it. You don't use a guilty person as your cover. You use someone invisible, someone small, someone who has no connections to pull, someone who cannot even raise their voice to say no. Kaiven picked up the marker, wrote slowly, deliberately, held the cardboard up toward Vedrik's back. Vedrik turned. Read it. The cardboard said, You destroyed my home for nothing. Vedrik held that for a long time. The muscle in his jaw moved. He did not say sorry. Men like Vedrik don't say sorry in the middle of losing ground. But he nodded. Once. The kind of nod that acknowledges a point without conceding the argument. He turned to his men. All of you outside. Give me the room. The men filed out through the broken wall without a word. Boots on rubble. Then quiet. Vedrik looked at Kaiven. Someone in my organization used your network to frame you, he said. Intentionally. They needed a clean address. A clean name. Yours fit. He paused. The person who did it is still active. They just hit another port. Kaiven didn't move. He stood by the workbench, holding the marker. He thought about the black car, the 4 nights of strange traffic, the engine idling at 2 in the morning. Someone had been close enough to his building to use the router in real time. Someone had been there, on his block, maybe in his building, using his name. Kaiven wrote, "Someone was outside my building at night. Black car. No plates. 4 nights before your people came." He held it up. Vedrik read it. He read it twice. Then he looked at Kaiven with something that was not quite recognition but getting close. "When did it start?" Kaiven held up 4 fingers, then pointed at the router, then pointed outside. Vedrik nodded slowly. "You were watching the traffic." Kaiven shook his head, tilted it, held a hand flat and wobbled it. Sort of. Not intentionally, just noticed. Vedrik looked at the router mounted near the window. He walked to it, looked at the make and model, looked at the placement, looked at the range it would cover. He turned. "Someone was close enough to piggyback this signal in real time," he said. "Not remote access, physical proximity." He looked at the street, then at the building layout, then back at Kaiven. "Which means the person who did this knows where you live. Knew it before I did. And chose you specifically." He said the last 3 words separately, like each one had its own weight. Kaiven stood in the ruin of his apartment, the open wall letting in cold morning air. And for the first time since the day started, something in his chest moved from confusion toward something quieter and colder. He was chosen. Not found. Chosen. From the bathroom, Rilo's small voice came down the hall. Question sound. The one that meant, "Are you there?" Kaiven moved to the doorframe, tapped the wood in the pattern the child knew. 3 taps. A pause. 2 more. "I'm here." Rilo went quiet. Vedrik watched this exchange. Watched the tap pattern. Watched the way Kaiven turned back after. Watched the efficiency of a habit built over years. He picked up his phone. Made a call. "Pull the residential record for Delwood Avenue. All units. Cross-reference proximity to a Wi-Fi signal point on the 2nd floor." A pause. "Now," Vedrik said. "Not when you have time. Now." He ended the call. He looked at Kaiven. "You need to leave here," he said. "You and the child. Whoever did this knows they used you. If they learn the frame is falling apart." He stopped. Didn't finish. He didn't need to. Kaiven already understood. A dead body absorbs suspicion even better than a clean name. He picked up the cardboard. Wrote slowly. "Where would we go?" 1 line. No drama. Just a question. Vedrik read it. He looked at Rilo, who had appeared quietly in the bathroom doorway at the end of the tap signal and was now standing there looking at Vedrik with that same open, unbothered expression from before. Stuffed wolf under 1 arm. Foam tile in the other hand. Completely calm. Completely trusting. Vedrik looked at the child for a moment, then back at Kaiven. "I'll handle it," he said. Kaiven wrote. "But." Vedrik read the word. Something crossed his face fast and was gone before it fully formed. "Because I tore down your wall," he said. "And because I was wrong." He said the second sentence like it cost him something real. He turned and walked out through the broken wall. Kaiven stood in the rubble, holding the cardboard, looking at the empty space where the wall used to be. The morning had gone from cold to colder. He looked at the router mounted by the window, that cheap piece of consumer hardware he bought refurbished for $22, that he set up so Mrs. Delvain could video call her granddaughter on Sunday afternoons, that he kept running so the kid on the 4th floor could submit his college applications from home, that he left open because shutting people out had always felt like the wrong answer, and someone had sat in a car outside and aimed that open door like a weapon, aimed it at him, at Rilo, at the whole fragile structure of their quiet life. He set the cardboard down, walked to the bedroom doorway. Rilo was there, on the floor, foam tiles stacked neatly in a row, stuffed wolf at the end of the row like a guard. Kaiven sat down next to the child, cross-legged on the floor, in the ruins. Rilo climbed into his lap without being asked. The way children do when they don't have the words but they have the instinct. He held Rilo and looked at the open wall, at the street, at the morning moving on out there like nothing had changed. Everything had changed. Thinking about the black car, the 4 nights of transfers, the deliberate frame. Someone had chosen him because he was invisible, because no one would believe a mute man with a toddler and a repair shop had any power to fight back. Because invisible means safe to use. And now his invisibility was gone, because whoever framed him wasn't finished yet. Chapter 4. The Alpha Who Trusted Nothing. Vedrik Halden had not slept in 31 hours. This was not unusual. He had built the habit a long time ago, back when the business was smaller and the margins tighter and the cost of a missed call could mean a container lost or a contact gone forever. Sleep was a liability. Rest was a scheduled item. He ran on black coffee and discipline the way other men ran on adrenaline. Except adrenaline was unreliable. Discipline was not. He sat in the back of the car and studied the digital trace report on his tablet. The city moved past the window. Glass towers, construction cranes, the ordinary architecture of power. He had built pieces of this city. His name was on 3 of those towers in ways the public couldn't see. Holding companies, subsidiaries, layers of legal structure that kept the public face clean and the operational reality private. That was how the empire worked. Invisible from the outside. Controlled from within. His forensics team pulled the trace report 3 days ago. Network origin. Delwood Avenue, 2nd floor residential. Transfer timestamps matching the exact window when the shipment route data moved. Device signature. Unregistered consumer router. Open access. Everything pointing to one address. One man. Kaiven Rho. No criminal record. No known associations with any competing operation or federal informant network. No financial trail suggesting outside payment. No travel history placing him near any of the affected ports. Just a repair technician. A mute repair technician. With a toddler. Vedrik stared at the screen. He had built his empire through control. Not by being the loudest man in the room. Not through volume or intimidation. By knowing things first. Intelligence was the foundation. Trust was earned slowly and spent carefully. Loyalty was tested by design, never assumed. Every person inside his organization had been vetted at a level most corporate compliance teams would consider excessive. Background checks going back decades. Financial monitoring at every level. Social mapping. Regular cross-checks against external databases. He did not take chances on people. Not anymore. He had learned that lesson at 23, inside a warehouse on the south side, when a man he'd known for 4 years and trusted completely sold the warehouse location to a competing operation for $40,000. The warehouse burned. 2 containers of product destroyed. 3 of his crew injured. 1, Marcus, 26, father of a daughter he called every night. Never walked without a cane again. Vedrik handled the betrayal personally. He was not proud of it. But he did not make the mistake of misplaced trust again. After Marcus, he built walls. High ones, thick ones, made of data and verification systems and documented confirmations. He built processes so airtight that a leak should have been impossible. And yet, someone was inside those walls, moving carefully, feeding federal authorities exact data at exact intervals, dismantling the network piece by piece, and pointing at a man who repaired broken radios for neighbors. The thing that bothered Vedrik most wasn't that it happened. Things happen. The thing that bothered him was the precision. Whoever was doing this understood the operation at a structural level. Not just the routes. The methodology. They knew which routes to leak and in what order. Not enough to collapse everything at once. Just enough to destabilize. To create pressure. To force responses. Responses like sending a demolition crew to Delwood Avenue at 5 in the morning. Vedrik looked at the city outside the window. He had been played. Not with brute force. With his own certainty. Someone had aimed his instincts at the wrong target and let him do the damage himself. That was the elegant part. That was what made his jaw tighten. He set the tablet on the seat beside him. Looked out the window. The city moved past in the early morning gray. He kept coming back to the child. Not because of sentiment, because it didn't fit any profile. He had walked into that apartment expecting hardware. Expecting servers or secondary devices or at minimum a sophisticated software setup. He expected someone who looked like they had something to hide. Instead, he found foam puzzle tiles, picture books with chewed corners, a stuffed wolf missing an eye button, and a toddler who walked across rubble toward a stranger without fear. Vedrik did not understand that. He had sat across tables from senators and attorneys and men who ran operations far older and more complex than his. He had watched every one of them calculate before they moved. Even the ones who acted impulsively were calculating, just on shorter timescales. Everyone carries a motive. Everyone carries an angle. That child carried none. Just an open face and a stuffed wolf and no concept of what a man like Vedrik could do. And it sat in him in a way he couldn't fully account for. He looked at the trace report again. Clean. His team was thorough. They ran the data 3 times. The network registered to Kaiven's apartment was the exit point for every leak transfer. But exit points get planted. This was not a technique Vedrik only knew from intelligence reports. It was a technique he had used himself. Once. Years ago. A shipping delay he needed to redirect attention from. You find a clean address, an open router, a name with no connections. You route your traffic through it from nearby. You make sure the trace leads there cleanly. And when the heat arrives, it arrives at that address. Not yours. The person there gets the full weight. The confusion of someone who genuinely has no framework for what is happening to them. That confusion becomes your cover. Because confusion is the one thing people don't usually manufacture. Rage you can perform. Calm you can fake. Innocence people attempt it constantly. But the specific bewilderment of someone whose world just broke for no reason they can find, that doesn't come from acting. Kaiven Rho had been bewildered. Every gesture, every cardboard note, every second of that interaction in the demolished apartment. The man wasn't afraid of being caught. He was confused about why any of this was happening to him at all. Vedrik looked at the city. If someone used Kaiven as a relay, they were close. The router's signal range was consumer grade. Maybe 300 feet in good conditions. Less through building walls. The transfers moved in bursts. Not sustained. Someone timing the uploads manually. Not automated. Personal. Deliberate. Someone who knew the router was open. Who scoped the location, who sat outside in a car and pushed data in managed intervals. Someone who understood federal trace methodology well enough to know an open consumer router with a clean residential registration would hold the investigation long enough to matter. That was not opportunism. That was planning. Inside knowledge. Vedrik opened his contacts, found the number, looked at it, then called. Archival Dross answered on the second ring. I heard you moved on the Delwood address, Archival said. His voice was steady, warm even, the tone of someone who was concerned. The tone of a man you trusted. Yes, Vedrik said. And nothing there. The silence that followed was half a second, maybe less, but it was there. The specific silence of someone processing information before deciding what to say next. A gap that shouldn't exist between a trusted colleague and a simple answer. Nothing at all? Archival said. Repair technician. Runs an open network for the building. Someone used it as an exit relay. So it's internal. Not a question. A conclusion. Offered fast. Too fast. Could be, Vedrik said. You want me to pull the operations roster? Cross-reference access levels with the leak timestamps? My team can have something to you by end of day. Vedrik looked out the window. Already done, he said. Silence. Longer this time. Just over a full second. Oh, Archival said. What did it show? Still compiling, Vedrik said. Right. Well, I'm in the office all day if you need anything. Whatever you need. Appreciate it, Vedrik said. He ended the call. Set the phone on the seat. Looked at it. 8 years. Kaiven had been inside the organization for 8 years. Came in as an operations analyst. Smart. Precise. Never made errors. Never cut corners. Never made noise about things that didn't concern him. Vedrik promoted him 4 times. Gave him access to every moving piece of the shipping operation. Trusted him with route logistics, port contacts, federal buffer arrangements. Everything. Because Kaiven earned it. Because Kaiven was exactly the kind of person who understood systems, who kept them running quietly and efficiently, who never gave you a reason to look twice. But the best people to betray you are always the ones who understood your systems. Because understanding systems means understanding exactly where the exits are. Vedrik picked up the tablet, opened the operations roster himself, ran the access levels against the leak timestamps, not because he didn't trust his team, because he needed to see it himself. He filtered the data, narrowed the window, cross-referenced the specific routes leaked with the clearances required to pull that data, narrowed further, filtered by time, by location, by sign-in records. The result took 4 minutes. When it came up on screen, Vedrik sat with it for a long time. 1 name with access to all 7 leaked routes. 1 login registered at the specific times the transfers occurred. 1 person who had standing authorization to be in the systems where the data lived. 1 person who just offered to cross-reference data Vedrik already had, and paused when told it was already done. Kaiven. Vedrik stared at the name on the screen. He had run this same kind of audit on 22 other people inside his organization over the past 8 years. Most cleared. 2 didn't. Both were removed. He had never run it on Kaiven. Not because Kaiven was above suspicion. Nobody was above suspicion. That was the rule. He hadn't run it on Kaiven because the data Kaiven handled was so deeply integrated into the daily operation that pulling him for scrutiny would have required shutting down 3 port schedules. That was not an accident. Vedrik understood this now. Kaiven had made himself too useful to audit. Deliberately, over 8 years. A position so embedded in the structure that removing him, even for investigation, would cost more than most operators could absorb. That was the long game. Not 4 days. Not 3 weeks. 8 years of making yourself the load-bearing wall in someone else's house. Vedrik set the tablet face down on the seat. He looked at the ceiling of the car. Breathed out slowly through his nose. 8 years. He had spent 8 years building trust with a man who had apparently decided, at some point, that the empire was worth more collapse than standing. And it had taken a mute repair technician and a toddler with a stuffed wolf to slow Vedrik down long enough to check. The car slowed. His driver mentioned construction on the bridge. Vedrik didn't respond. He was back in the demolished apartment, looking at Kaiven's face. The confusion there, real and unperformed. The child walking across rubble like the rubble was nothing. Like danger was just an unfamiliar person worth investigating. He thought about what Kaiven had constructed. Not just the leak, the entire architecture of the frame. Use a clean address. Person with no power. Someone who couldn't even raise a voice to object. Let Vedrik's own certainty become the weapon. Let the Alpha's response do the destruction. Kaiven's home gone. Kaiven now visible to every person who knew he'd been used as a relay. And Kaiven standing at the edge of it all offering to help. Watching. That wasn't operational necessity. That was amusement. Vedrik picked up the phone. Called his security director. Full audit on Kaiven. Complete. Private accounts. Device history. Travel records. All of it. He listened. No. Do not tell him. Do not tell anyone. Run it completely quiet. He ended the call. Picked the tablet back up. Opened the residential files for Delwood Avenue. Looked at the units. Looked at the distances from the 2nd floor signal point. Thought about a black car. No plates. 2 in the morning. Idling engine. Thought about a man who knew exactly which open router to use. Who knew the timing window. Who knew how to stay close without being seen. He looked at the block layout. There was a property across the street from Kaiven's building. Commercial space. A dry cleaning storefront with a back office that had been dark for 6 months. Owned by a holding company. He ran the holding company name. He came back registered in Delaware. Standard. Clean. The kind of registration that means nothing except that someone wanted the ownership obscured. He ran the second layer. Another holding. This one registered in Nevada. Third layer. A real estate trust. He kept running. At the fourth layer a name appeared. Not Archival directly. An associate. Someone who appeared twice in Archival's peripheral network. An attorney who had handled a property transaction for an entity connected to one of Archival's former associates 3 years ago. 2 degrees. That was all. 2 degrees between the man running Vedric's entire shipping operation and a dark storefront directly across the street from Kaiven's Wi-Fi router. Close enough to use it in real time. Close enough to watch. Vedric stared at the screen, then looked out at the city moving past. Full morning now. Traffic. People. The ordinary machine of another day running on schedule. And on Delwood Avenue, a mute technician was sitting in the rubble of everything he had. Chosen because he was small. Chosen because he was invisible. Chosen because no one would think to look at him twice. No voice. No connections. No way to fight back against a name attached to demolition equipment and private forensics teams. Except he had fought back. Not with noise. With cardboard. A marker. The truth written in plain words held up in a destroyed room. That was what Vedric couldn't shake. Not the innocence. The steadiness. The way a man with nothing left in the room kept standing up and writing the next sentence. Vedric picked up the phone. Called his security director. Full audit on archival dross. Complete. Private accounts. Device history. Travel records. The property at 1220 Delwood. Cross Street commercial. All of it. He listened. No. Do not tell him. Do not tell anyone in the operations division. Run it completely quiet and report only to me. He ended the call. He looked out the window one more time. The city kept moving. Indifferent. Efficient. He thought about the word mine on that piece of cardboard. One word. No explanation. No defense. No plea. Just a man who found something worth protecting and decided it was his regardless of what was happening around him. Vedric had spent 8 years trusting someone with everything. And that person had spent 8 years deciding it wasn't enough. He looked at his reflection in the window glass. For the first time in a long time, the certainty in his face looked less like strength, and more like something he had been hiding behind. The car pulled up to the curb outside his building. His driver put it in park but said nothing. Vedric didn't move. He sat in the quiet back of that car and looked at his building. 40 floors of glass and steel with his holding company's name on the lease. All of it still standing. For now. Because Archival had chosen to dismantle it slowly. Not all at once. One route at a time. One port at a time. One small, invisible man at a time. The patience in that was the thing. 8 years. Vedric had always believed patience was his edge. He was starting to understand he was not the only one who had it. He opened the car door, stepped out into the morning, and somewhere across the city, on a demolished second floor on Delwood Avenue, a man with no voice was sitting in the rubble of his life, waiting, not because he trusted what came next, because he had no other option. And sometimes that is the same thing as courage. Vedric just confirmed what he's been refusing to see. Now the real question is, does he move on Archival quietly, or does he burn the entire empire down to get to him? Drop your prediction in the comments. What do you think happens next? Chapter 5. The target on an innocent back. The bullet hit the concrete post 6 inches from Kaiven's left ear. He didn't hear the shot. That was the part that made no sense until it did. Suppressors. No sound. No warning. Just a sharp crack of stone and a spray of dust that hit the side of his face like a handful of gravel thrown hard. He dropped. Instinct. Not training. Just the body deciding before the mind caught up. 1 second he was walking. The next second he was on his knees on the sidewalk with his palms on concrete and his heart slamming so loud he could feel it in his back teeth. And then Rilo, who had been 2 steps ahead of him, holding the paper bag of what little food they'd managed to salvage from the destroyed kitchen, stopped walking and turned around. Calm. Like always. Not calm because the child wasn't frightened. Calm because Rilo had learned early in the way children learn the things they have to, that when Kaiven's face changed shape, you stopped and you watched that face and you did what it said. Kaiven's face said, "Get down." Down. He grabbed Rilo's arm and pulled the child flat against the building wall. Not with a word. With his hands. His whole body moved to put itself between Rilo and the street before he had finished the thought. He pressed them both against the stone wall. Held still. Listened. The block around them ran exactly as it always did. Foot traffic moving in both directions. A woman pushing a stroller 3 buildings down. A delivery truck double-parked on the corner with the hazards blinking. A man reading something on his phone near the crosswalk. Not looking up. Nobody running. Nobody moving with purpose. Nothing that said anything was wrong. But the hole in the concrete post was there. And the angle of it said rooftop. Across the street. Or above. The geometry of it was clear. His pulse was loud in his ears. Rilo had not made a sound. The child had pressed flat against the building the moment Kaiven's hand said to and stayed there. Eyes wide. Watching Kaiven's face for the next instruction. Kaiven looked at the street. Then up. Then at the delivery truck on the corner. The driver's window was open. The driver was looking at a clipboard, pen in hand. Not looking at Kaiven. Not looking at the building across the street. Just a man on a route. Then a door slammed somewhere above. Footsteps on a fire escape. Fast. Descending. Going down. 2 flights. 3. Gone into the alley below. Kaiven counted 10 seconds. Then 15. Then he moved. He picked Rilo up, pressed the child against his chest, and moved fast and low along the building wall toward the corner. Away from the angle. Away from the sight line. He turned the corner. Stopped. Pressed his back against the brick. Breathed. Long breath in. Hold. Rilo's face was against his neck. The small hands were gripping tight, fingers bunched in the fabric of his shirt. Still no sound from the child. Quiet. Trusting. The kind of trust that cuts deeper than any other kind because it has never been explained. It has just always been there. Kaiven stood at that corner for 20 seconds. Then his phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. He answered it and held it to his ear. Don't move from that corner. Vedric's voice. Controlled. Already in motion. I have people a minute out. Kaiven looked at the intersection. How did Vedric know which corner? He looked up. A small camera mounted at the junction of the traffic signal arm. Not a city camera. Private one. The housing was wrong for municipal equipment. Pointed at the block. Already there. Already watching. Before the shot. Kaiven stood at that corner with Rilo in his arms and felt something that was not quite gratitude and not quite anger. A place between the two. The uncomfortable feeling of being protected by the same person who destroyed your home. Of owing something to someone you had every reason to resent. Of the fact that both things could be true at once and neither one canceled the other. 2 black SUVs came around the corner 85 seconds later. They didn't screech. They just arrived. Smooth. Fast. Professional. The rear door opened. Vedric stepped out. He looked at Kaiven. Then at Rilo. Then at the paper bag still somehow in Rilo's hand. The child had not dropped it. Are you hurt? Vedric said. Kaiven shook his head. Vedric looked at the post on the corner. At the impact mark. At the angle. His jaw tightened. He looked at the rooftop across from the impact site. Then he looked at Kaiven. For a moment, just a moment, something crossed his face that wasn't business. That wasn't strategy. That was something older and more human. It left fast. Get in the car, he said. Kaiven looked at him, then at the car. He wrote nothing. He had no cardboard, no marker. So he looked at Vedric for 3 full seconds. And Vedric looked back. Not with the certainty from the demolished apartment. with something different, an acknowledgement. I know what I asked you to trust. Kaiven got in the car. The shooter's equipment was recovered from the rooftop of the dry cleaning storefront across the street from Kaiven's building. Not improvised. Professional. A precision rifle set up on a monopod. Sight zeroed to the second-floor window. Already broken down and bagged when Vadrik's team got there. But not fast enough. They found a cigarette, barely smoked, placed on the ledge with the care of someone who knew they might need to leave fast but expected to have time first. And a partial boot print in the gravel at the roof access door. And on the wall beside that door, scratched into the paint with something sharp and deliberate, for digits. A code. Not random. Not a date. A code. Vadrik stood on that rooftop and looked at those 4 scratched digits. He ran them on his phone. The result came back in under 30 seconds. The code matched an internal access key. Not from an outside contractor. From inside the operations building. Assigned to the security coordination team that reported to archival Dross. Specifically to a contract security coordinator named Jelson Briggs. Employed 6 months ago. Entered the operations system through a standard vendor contract. Appeared in route review files during the same window the first data leak occurred. Vadrik stood on that rooftop and looked at the city. The wind off the water was cold and direct. It had the clean, impersonal quality of air that doesn't care what it moves through. He had thought archival was dismantling the empire through exposure. Feeding routes to federal authorities. Methodical. Patient. That was one kind of play. Sending a rifle to a residential block was a different kind entirely. Leaking data was a long game move. Sending a shooter to a corner where a mute man was walking with a 3-year-old was a panic move. And panic told you something. Panic told you the plan was no longer running on schedule. Which meant archival knew something had shifted. Which meant someone inside Vadrik's current operation had spoken. Or, archival had anticipated that the router logs would be found. That Kaiven's technical read of the data was the one variable he hadn't accounted for. Vadrik looked at the monopod imprint in the rooftop gravel. Zeroed to the second floor. Not a warning shot. A solution shot. Kaiven Rho knew nothing. Had nothing. Was nothing operational. Except he had the router. He had the firmware logs. He had, without ever knowing it, a physical record of every transfer that moved through his connection. Cached automatically. Standard consumer router behavior. And the frame had been built on the assumption that the demolition would destroy the device before anyone thought to check it. But the demolition stopped. Because of a toddler and a stuffed wolf. And now the router was in Dorian's hands. And archival had apparently figured that out. Vadrik looked at the city. He called his tech team. Pull the router from the Delwood address. Full firmware extraction. Transfer logs. Every packet that touched that device in the past 30 days. He paused. And do it before anyone else gets there first. He ended the call. He stood on the rooftop. Below him, 2 blocks away, Kaiven and Rilo were sitting in the back of an SUV. Safe. For now. And archival Dross was somewhere in the city. Doing the math on what was left exposed. And deciding what to do about it. Kaiven sat in the back of the SUV with Rilo in his lap. The vehicle moved through traffic smoothly. No siren. No urgency from the outside. But inside, the air was dense with things not being said. Vadrik sat across from him. Not looking at his phone for once. Looking at Kaiven. The man who took that shot has a connection to Archival's team, he said. Which means archival knows the frame is coming apart. And instead of running, he's cleaning. Cleaning. Kaiven had repaired enough broken devices to understand what that meant. When a component starts failing, you don't always replace it. Sometimes you remove it. And the circuit keeps running. Cleaner. Quieter. He was the component. Vadrik read his expression. You understand, Vadrik said. Kaiven nodded. Then you understand why you're not going back to Delwood. Kaiven looked at Rilo. Rilo was asleep. Just like that. Head on Kaiven's chest. The paper bag still loosely in one small hand. Like nothing in the world could stop a tired 3-year-old from sleeping. Kaiven looked at Vedrik. He held up one finger, then pointed at the floor between them. One question, one answer. Vedrik looked at him. Ask it, he said. Kaiven pressed his palm flat, then turned it over. Spread the fingers wide. Open. Why are you helping us? Vedrik looked at the hand, at the question in it. He didn't answer immediately. He looked out the window, at the city moving past. Because I made a mistake, he said. And I don't leave those uncorrected. He paused. And because whoever tried to kill you today used my blind spot to do it. That makes it my problem now. That was the operational answer. Kaiven heard it, but he also heard the half-second before it. The pause where a different answer almost came out. He looked down at Rilo sleeping, the paper bag, the stuffed wolf tucked under the arm. The child who walked toward danger without fear because trust was the only tool available. Kaiven closed his eyes, breathed. When he opened them, the city was still moving past the window, and the assassin was still somewhere in it. And Arkhavildros was still ahead of them. But for the first time since the wall came down, Kaiven was not alone in the rubble. That was something. He wasn't sure yet what kind of something, but it was something. Chapter 6. The Reluctant Partnership. The safe house was on the 14th floor of a building Vedrik owned through 4 layers of holding companies. Kaiven didn't ask about the address. He sat in the back of the SUV and watched the city move past the window and held Rilo, who was asleep against his chest before they had traveled 6 blocks. The child slept like someone had flipped a switch. Complete, immediate, total trust that everything requiring vigilance was handled. Kaiven had always found that both painful and extraordinary. The trust of a child in your hands. The weight of it. The way it made every decision feel like it had more consequences than it would have had alone. He looked at the city moving past and thought about the hole in the concrete post. 6 inches. 6 inches to the left and this car ride would have had a different shape entirely. He didn't stay long in that thought. He had learned early that staying in those thoughts accomplished nothing. The car stopped. The building entrance was unremarkable. Residential tower. Clean lobby. No branding visible. They took an elevator that required a keycard. The 14th floor hallway was carpeted and quiet. The door to the unit was unmarked. Kaiven carried Rilo through the door and stood in the room. Clean. Spare. A kitchen with actual food in the refrigerator. 2 bedrooms. 1 bathroom with a showerhead that ran hot for longer than 4 minutes. He stood in the center of the room for a moment. Took it in. He looked at the window. The city from 14 floors looked the same as it looked from 2. Just smaller. More distance between you and the things trying to reach you. Rilo stirred. Half woke. Looked around. Looked at Kaiven. Found the couch. Climbed down. And immediately began rearranging the cushions with the architectural focus of a toddler who had decided that whatever this place was, it needed a better fort than the last one. Kaiven stood in the kitchen doorway and watched this. He felt something loosen slightly in his chest. Not relief. Something smaller than relief. Just the recognition that for this moment the child was fine. Moving. Focused. Designing. Fine. He went to the sink. Ran water over the scraped knuckles on his right hand. He had not noticed them until now. Cold water first, then warm. He stood at a sink that wasn't his, in a kitchen that wasn't his, in a building that wasn't his, and thought about the workbench back on Delwood, the sawhorses, the flat door, the tools spread across the surface, all of it blown open and scattered. He turned off the water, dried his hands, sat down at the kitchen table. He was still sitting there when Dorian Voss walked in. She nodded at Kaiven, set the bag on the table. I pulled the router logs, she said. She opened the laptop, turned it toward Kaiven. He looked at the screen. Transfer logs, timestamps, device signatures, IP paths. It was a lot of data, but Kaiven had been reading network diagnostics for years. He pulled the laptop closer. His eyes moved. Fast. Dorian watched him. You can actually read that, she said. Not a question. More like a recalibration. Kaiven nodded without looking up. His finger traced a line on the screen. He pointed at a cluster of transfers, then at the timestamps, then at the device signature that appeared repeatedly through the window. The same device, every time, consistent timing, deliberate spacing, the signature of someone who understood how trace methodology worked and was staying just inside the noise floor. Kaiven pointed at the timestamp pattern, tapped it twice, then held up 2 fingers, then pointed toward the window. Outside. Close. 200 feet, maybe less. Dorian leaned in. You're saying the device was physically close to you the whole time? Kaiven nodded. And the timing, the spacing between uploads, that's intentional? Another nod. Dorian looked at the log. Someone was manually pacing the transfers, she said slowly. Not running an automated script. Someone was sitting nearby and pushing data in intervals. She looked at Kaiven. Which means they were watching the block. Watching your building. Watching for any sign you'd noticed. She turned back to the screen. And the device signature. She stopped. Typed something. Ran a comparison. The result came up on the screen. She stared at it. Then she looked at the door like she was deciding whether to call Vedrik in or handle the next part herself. She called Vedrik. He came through the door 30 seconds later. Stood behind Dorian. Read the screen. The device signature from Kaiven's router logs matched a registered device inside Vedrik's own operations building. Not a contractor device. An internal one. Registered to a terminal in the sub-level operations office. The office that Archival Dross had used as his base for 3 of the last 4 years. Vedrik looked at the screen for a long time. Then he looked at Kaiven. Can you trace the full path? He said. Kaiven pulled the laptop toward him. He worked. Not fast. Not slow. Steady. The way he worked on circuit boards. One connection at a time. Testing each node. Following the path wherever it led. Dorian watched him. After a few minutes she stopped watching and started helping. She recognized what he was doing. They didn't talk about it. They just worked. Rilo came to the table at some point and climbed into Kaiven's lap and watched the screen for 30 seconds with that serious toddler expression. Then climbed back off and went to rearrange the couch cushions. Vedrik stood at the window, his back to the room, his hands clasped behind him, looking at the city the way generals look at maps. Kaiven found the path at 4:17 in the afternoon. He sat back. Tapped the table twice. Dorian leaned in. Read the result. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at Vedrik's back. He found the full route, she said. From the operations terminal. Through the router relay on Delwood. To 3 federal collection servers. She paused. And there's a 4th destination. Vedrik turned. Not federal, she continued. Private. Encrypted archive server. Registered to a legal entity out of the Cayman Islands. She looked at Kaiven. He's not just leaking to the feds. He's building his own library. Vedrik walked to the table. He looked at the screen. Every route. Every contact. Every operational file that moved through that system in the last 8 months. He straightened. He's not dismantling the operation, Vedrik said. He said the next words carefully, like each one cost something. He's rebuilding it, under his own name, using my infrastructure as the foundation. The room was quiet. Rilo knocked a couch cushion off the fort and watched it fall, then picked it up and put it back. Kaiven looked at Vedrik. The Alpha was standing at the table looking at the evidence of 8 years of loyalty being converted into a competing empire. His face was controlled, but his eyes were a different thing entirely. Kaiven had seen that expression before, in the faces of people who brought him their broken devices, usually the ones that were given as gifts, or built by hand, or had been in the family for years, not the cheap replaceable ones, the ones that meant something. That specific expression. Not anger, betrayal. The look of someone who gave something real and found out it was being received as raw material. Vedrik looked at Kaiven. You found this, he said. Kaiven looked at him, then at the screen, then back. He shrugged once. Small, flat, like it was just the obvious next step in a diagnostic. Vedrik shook his head slightly. No, he said. My team didn't find it. Dorian didn't find it. You found it. He paused. Because you read the data the way someone reads it when they built the system by hand. When they know where the shortcuts are because they've used them. He paused again. I need you to keep going. Kaiven looked at him for a long moment. He picked up his phone, opened the Notes app, typed, held it out. The screen said, You tore down my apartment. Someone shot at my child today. Give me one reason this ends with Rilo safe. Vedrik read it. He didn't look away from the screen when he answered. Because the moment Archivel's archive goes live, every operation in this network surfaces publicly. Federal, foreign, and independent. Every contact, every safe location, every person who was protected by the architecture being invisible. He paused. Including this one. Kaiven read that, sat with the weight of it. The archive going live wasn't just the end of Vedrik's empire. It was the end of every protective layer around them. The safe house, the guards outside, the operational security that was the only thing currently standing between Rilo and the people who had already sent a shooter once. All of it gone. Because Archival was not just burning Vedrik's empire. He was clearing the ground for his own. And clearance means no witnesses, no loose ends. No mute technicians sitting in borrowed kitchens with router logs and the wrong kind of knowledge. Kaiven looked at Rilo's cushion fort, the small feet sticking out from under the structure, the sound of the stuffed wolf being repositioned. He looked at Vedrik. He typed one more word on the phone, held it up. Okay. Vedrik read it. He nodded once. That was the whole agreement. No ceremony, no formality, no speech about partnerships or mutual benefit. Just two people with no better option choosing the only path that kept a child in a cushion fort safe. The reluctant partnership, built on rubble, operating in a borrowed kitchen, running on borrowed time. They worked through the night. Kaiven mapped the full data path. Every branch, every node, every connection between Archivel's operations terminal and the servers it was feeding. Dorian pulled the technical architecture of the archive server. Vedrik worked his side. Contacts. Counterintelligence. Setting pieces in place without showing his hand. They didn't talk more than the work required. But something shifted. Not friendship. Not trust. Not yet. But a kind of recognition. The kind that happens when two people are working on the same problem and discover they're both thinking faster than the conversation. At 2 in the morning, Kaiven found the kill switch. Every system Archival had built had won. Not because Archival was careless. Because Archival was smart. Smart people build exits. Always. The kill switch was buried 6 layers deep in the archive server's authentication protocol. A specific sequence. Not a password. A behavioral pattern. The kind of thing a machine wouldn't randomly stumble across. But Kaiven had spent years finding the non-obvious paths in broken systems. He tapped the table, pointed at the screen. Dorian looked. Her eyes went wide. That's the override, she said. Kaiven nodded. If we trigger that, she looked at Vedrik. It collapses the archive before the upload completes. Destroys the data. Vedrik came to the table. Read the screen. Stood there. But it also. Dorian nodded before he finished. It exposes the full architecture in the process. Every route, every connection, everything Archival built, and everything the archive was built on top of. She looked at Vedrik. To trigger the kill switch, the archive goes open for 6 seconds. Everything inside becomes visible. Not to the public. To federal monitoring systems that were already watching the server. 6 seconds. The entire operation. Exposed. Vedrik stood at that table for a long time. He looked at the screen, then at Kaiven. Saving his world meant exposing everything in it. The routes, the contacts, the infrastructure. 8 years of building. Collapsed in 6 seconds. Or let Archival finish. Let the archive go live. And watch everything collapse in a different way. Slower. More controlled. by someone who had spent 8 years learning how every piece fit together. Vedrik looked at Kaiven, the man who had lost everything in a morning, who was sitting in a borrowed kitchen at 2 in the morning helping dismantle the empire of the man who demolished his home. Quietly, efficiently, without being asked twice. If I trigger that switch, Vedrik said slowly, everything I built goes with it. He looked at the screen. And if I don't, Arkhavel finishes what he started. He looked at Kaiven. Kaiven held up 2 fingers, then pointed at Rilo's cushion fort in the other room. 2 people in this equation who are not part of your empire. Make sure your answer includes them. Vedrik read the gesture. He stood straight. The decision was already made. It had been made the moment he saw the hole in the concrete post on Delwood Avenue. He just needed to stand inside it. We trigger the switch, he said. Dorian looked at him. Tonight, he added. Before Arkhavel knows we found it. Chapter 7. What's left when the empire falls? Arkhavel Dross found out at 3:44 in the morning. Not from a call. Not from a message. From the silence. The upload he had been running in 12-hour intervals stopped mid-transfer. Not interrupted. Terminated. The kind of termination that doesn't come from a network outage. That doesn't come from a timeout. The kind that comes from someone who found the kill switch. He sat at his desk and looked at the screen. The status field said one word. Purged. He stared at it. His desk was clean. It was always clean. He was the kind of person who organized his space the way he organized everything else, with the calm, precise attention of someone who had decided that control was not a preference but a requirement. The clean desk looked the same as it always had. But the word purged on the screen meant that something Arkhavel had built with 8 years of patience and access and careful, invisible work was now gone. Not damaged. Gone. He sat with that for a full minute. Then he picked up his phone. Called Jelson Briggs. No answer. He called again. Silence. Third call. Nothing. He stood up. He was already moving before he decided where he was going. Because men like Arkhavel don't stop when a plan fails. They accelerate. They go to the thing that gives them the most leverage fastest. And the thing with the most leverage right now was not Vedrik. It was Kaiven. Not because Kaiven mattered operationally. Because Kaiven was the one weak point in Vedrik's current position. The man Vedrik had wronged. The man Vedrik was now protecting. The man whose destruction would cut Vedrik in a way that losing routes and contacts never could. Arkhavel understood this instinctively. The way predators understand where the soft spots are. He got in his car. He drove. The safe house's exterior camera picked up Arkhavel's car 2 blocks out at 4:02 in the morning. Vedrik's security director, a man named Coltrane Ash, was already on the phone. He's moving toward the building. Alone. No visible backup. Vedrik was awake. He had not slept. He looked at Coltrane. Let him come, he said. Coltrane looked at him. He comes to us, Vedrik said. We don't chase. He looked at the camera feed on the tablet in his hand. Arkhavel's car. Moving steadily. No hesitation in the approach. No route changes. No pauses. The approach of a man who had committed to the next move and was executing it. He thinks he still has a move left, Vedrik said. He watched the car on the screen. He thought about 8 years. The number kept surfacing. 8 years. Not months. Not a season of bad decisions. 8 years of daily access. Daily proximity. Daily trust extended and received. The specific intimacy of working alongside someone long enough that you stop noticing them as a variable. You stop checking the work because the work is always right. You stop questioning the judgment because the judgment has always been sound. You start treating a person like a system, and systems don't betray you. People do. Vedrik had known this. He had built the entire architecture of his operation around this truth. And then he had given Arkhavel 8 years to become invisible inside it. He watched the car pull to the curb. Watched Arkhavel step out. Watched him move toward the building entrance with the specific composure of a man who believed the game was still running. Let him make it, Vedrik said. Coltrane nodded once. Vedrik put the tablet down, stood at the window, waited. The safe house hallway camera showed Arkavel stepping off the elevator at 4:09, moving toward the door. He made it to the hallway. He did not make it to the door. Coltrane Ash was already there. 2 others flanked. Arkavel stopped. He looked at the 3 men in the hallway, at the door, at the camera in the corner of the ceiling. He looked directly into it, like he knew Vedrik was watching, like he had one more thing to say. The door opened. Vedrik stepped out. He had heard the quiet that came before movement in the building. The specific quiet of people switching modes. Not sleeping, not working, preparing. He got up, checked on Rilo. The child was deep asleep, the stuffed wolf tucked under one arm. The couch cushion fort still intact around the small body. Kaiven stood in the doorway and looked at Rilo for a moment. Then he went to the kitchen table, opened the laptop. He pulled up the archive status. Purged. He stared at it. Then he pulled up a secondary screen. The kill switch sequence had triggered exactly as planned. But Dorian had been right about the 6-second window. In those 6 seconds, the federal monitoring systems had logged everything. Every route, every contact, every operation, including Vedrik's. All of it. On federal servers now. Not published, not active, but documented. The Empire was not destroyed, but it was no longer hidden. Kaiven sat with that. He thought about what that meant for the man in the next room. The man who had ordered the demolition of his home. The man who had put guards around him after. The man who said I was wrong with the specific weight of someone who did not say it easily. He thought about the word mine, written on cardboard in a destroyed apartment. He thought about what it meant to build something with your hands from nothing and have someone drive a machine through it, and what it meant to still be standing on the other side. Arkavel walked through the building entrance at 4:09. He had bypassed the outer security in a way that should have been impossible. A code, an old one, from a system that had been supposed to cycle 3 months ago, hadn't. An oversight. The kind that happens when an operations director responsible for system security is also the person quietly keeping old access keys alive. He made it to the 14th floor. He made it to the hallway. He did not make it to the door. Coltrane Ash was already there. 2 others flanked. Arkavel stopped. He looked at the 3 men in the hallway. He looked at the door. Then he looked at the camera in the corner of the ceiling. He looked directly into it, like he knew Vedrik was watching. Like he had one more thing to say. The door opened. Vedrik stepped out. He stood in the hallway 6 feet from Arkavel Dross. The man he had trusted for 8 years. The man who had access to every moving part of everything. The man who had used that access to build something of his own on the inside of Vedrik's house. They looked at each other. 6 feet of carpeted hallway between them. No performance. No speech. No theater. Just 2 men. One of whom had expected this moment. One of whom had not expected to feel the particular weight of it when it arrived. The hallway lights were steady. Corporate grade. The kind of light that doesn't flicker. That doesn't give anything away. Arkavel was dressed the same as always. Clean. Composed. Like a man who had come to a scheduled meeting. Not like a man who had just driven across a city at 4 in the morning after watching his 8-year plan collapse in real time. That composure was the thing. Vedrik had trained himself to recognize it. The composure of someone who still believes they have a move left. The archive is gone, Vedrik said. Arkavel looked at him. His expression didn't shift. You know what the federal logs have now, he said. Not a question. A statement. Delivered the way someone delivers information they calculated you would need to hear. Yes, Vedrik said. Then you know it doesn't matter that the archive is gone, Arkavel said. The documentation exists. Federal servers. Everything. He paused. Let that land. I built a cage around you, Vedrik. I just didn't close the door yet. Vedrik looked at him. He let several seconds pass. Long enough to make the silence uncomfortable. Long enough to let Arkavel hear what wasn't being said. Why? Vedrik said. Not accusatory. not emotional. The question stripped down to its simplest form. You had everything. You had access, position, trust, and the specific kind of invisibility that operational power gives the people who hold it. Archival looked at him. Something moved through his face. Not regret. Not pride. Something that didn't have a clean name. The expression of a man who spent years building a decision one careful layer at a time and was now standing inside the room that decision had made. Because you were going to cut me out, Archival said. His voice was even. Not raised. Not broken. Just even. Like a man reading from a document he had written a long time ago and revisited many times since. Not this year. Not next. But eventually. I've watched you do it to 3 people. People who built as much as I did. People who were essential until they weren't. Who disappeared from the operation the moment you decided the math had changed. He held Vadrik's gaze. Darnell Watkins. Sabine Crew. Terrence Polk. 3 names. Delivered like evidence. Each of them built something real inside this organization. Each of them was essential until you decided the risk was no longer worth the cost. And each of them was gone within 60 days of that decision. He paused. I was not going to let that be me. The hallway was very quiet. Coltrane and the 2 men flanking hadn't moved. Hadn't breathed loud. Vadrik stood there. The accusation had enough truth in it to make silence the only honest response. Because it was true. He had done the math. Made the call. Moved on. He had told himself each time that it was necessary. That operations required it. That sentiment was a liability. He had not spent much time with what those decisions cost the people on the other side of them. Archival watched his face. You understand, Archival said. Not gloating. Just confirming. Yes, Vadrik said. Quiet. Flat. But you sent a shooter to a residential block, Vadrik said. You put a professional rifle on a rooftop over a man who had nothing to do with any of this. Over a child. He let that sit. Over a 3-year-old. Archival's jaw moved. The composure flickered once. Collateral management, he said. And that was the sentence. That was the one that finished it. Not because Vadrik lost his temper. He didn't. He looked at Archival with the specific quiet of a man who has just heard the one thing that makes a decision completely simple. Collateral management. A child in a cushion fort. Collateral. Coltrane, Vadrik said. Archival was in custody before another word was spoken. Clean. Fast. Done. The hallway was quiet again. Vadrik stood in it. He stood there after his people moved Archival through a far door and into a secure room. He stood alone in the carpeted hallway at 4 in the morning, and felt the specific weight of 8 years ending in 6 seconds of archive data and 1 sentence in a hallway. Then he went back inside. Kaiven was at the kitchen table. He looked up. He read Vadrik's face. He waited. Vadrik sat down across from him. He put his forearms on the table. He looked at the laptop screen, at the purged status, at the federal log confirmation. It's done, he said. Kaiven waited. Archival is secured. His shooter is in custody. The archive is gone. He paused. The federal documentation exists. Covers the full operation. He looked at Kaiven. Including what I built. Kaiven looked at him. Waited for the rest. I've been in contact with a federal liaison for 6 hours, Vadrik said. There's a negotiation. Archival's full network in exchange for a structured wind down. He said the next part carefully. Not a clean exit, but a managed one. He looked at his hands on the table. The empire ends. The people inside it have a path out. The contacts get protected where they can be. He looked up. And I take responsibility for what I built. Kaiven sat across from him. He picked up his phone. Typed slowly. Held it out. The screen said, Rilo doesn't get to grow up in rubble. Vadrik read it. He nodded. No, he said. Rilo doesn't. Kaiven typed again. And a new apartment. Better than the last one. With a workbench. Vadrik read it. Something crossed his face. Not a smile, but adjacent to one. The kind of expression a face makes when it's been holding something heavy for too long and someone lifts a corner of it. Yes, he said. Kaiven typed one more line. Held it up. Stop destroying things that people built with their hands. Vedrik read it. He sat with it. For a long time. That's fair, he said. From the other room a small sound. The cushion fort. Then the light patter of small feet on the floor. Rilo appeared in the kitchen doorway. Hair everywhere. Eyes half open. Stuffed wolf dragging on the floor from one hand. The child looked at Kaiven. Then at Vedrik. Then walked across the kitchen. Past Kaiven. To Vedrik. And held the stuffed wolf up. Same gesture. Same face. Same offer. An introduction. Or a verdict. Maybe both. Vedrik looked at the wolf. This time he took it. He held it in both hands. He looked at it. The frayed ear. The missing eye replaced with black felt that someone had glued in by hand. The softness worn down in specific places from years of being held. This was not a new toy. This was a thing that had been carried everywhere. Through a cramped apartment on Delwood Avenue. Through a morning of demolition. Through a corner where a bullet missed by 6 inches. Through a borrowed kitchen in a safe house on the 14th floor. Everywhere. Because some things are not about value. They're about continuity. About the physical presence of something that was there during all of it. Vedrik held it for a moment. He looked at Rilo. The child was watching him with that same open, patient expression. Not asking for it back. Not anxious. Just watching. Like the offer was still on the table. Like the verdict was still being considered. Vedrik handed it back. Carefully. The way you return something that belongs to someone and you understand that it belongs to them in a way that cannot be bought or replaced. Rilo took it back. Looked at him for another long second. Then turned and padded back to the cushion fort. Vedrik looked at the empty doorway. Then at Kaiven. The question in Kaiven's face was not written on a phone or a piece of cardboard. It was just there. In the way people ask things without words when they've run out of other methods. In the way a person looks at someone after everything has come apart and is still sitting across from them at 4 in the morning. Not asking for an explanation. Not asking for a guarantee. Just asking, what are you now? Not what you were before. Not what the operation was. Not what the empire was. What are you, now? Vedrik looked at his hands on the table. I don't know what comes next, he said. He said it without qualification. Without performance. Like a man who had spent years being certain about everything and was standing now inside the particular quiet of not knowing. The quiet that comes when the structure you built is gone. And the rubble is still warm. And you are still standing in it. But whatever comes next, he said, doesn't include you in the rubble. He paused. That's the only thing I'm certain about right now. Kaiven looked at him. He sat with those words. Turned them over. Not because he doubted them. Because he wanted to hold them for a moment before they became ordinary. The way you hold something warm when you've been cold for too long. He picked up his phone one more time. Typed. Held it out. The screen said, that's enough. And it was. Not because everything was fixed. Not because the demolished apartment was rebuilt. Not because the morning when the excavator came through the wall could be taken back. Not because Rilo would not carry the memory of gunfire and rubble and a frightening morning that should never have happened to a child. But because Kaiven Rho had been invisible his whole life. Invisible to the city. Invisible to the people who made decisions that affected people like him. Used as a relay. Chosen as a frame. Presumed to have no power to respond. And none of that had turned out to be true. He had read the data when no one else thought to look. He had found the kill switch in a system that trained professionals missed. He had sat in a demolished room and written the truth on cardboard and held it up until someone was forced to read it. He had been chosen because he was invisible. And he had ended an 8-year operation from a borrowed kitchen table with a toddler asleep in a cushion fort 6 feet away. Not because he was powerful. Because he was precise. Because he knew how systems worked. Because broken things had been his whole life. And he knew better than anyone. That broken doesn't mean done. The morning came in through the safe house windows, gray and quiet. Rilo woke up fully at 7 and ate cereal from a bowl Kaiven found in the cabinet. Vedrik was on his phone in the other room, building the pieces of what came after. Dorian had gone home 3 hours ago. Coltrane was in the building below. And Kaiven sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he hadn't asked for and found waiting. He looked at the city through the window. 14 floors up. Different angle. Same city. He thought about the workbench, the sawhorses, the flat door from the dumpster on Mercer Street. He would build another one. He always did. Rilo came to the table and climbed into his lap. Leaned against his chest. Stuffed wolf between them. He put his hand on the small back. Felt the breathing. Steady. Calm. Alive. That was the only word that mattered this morning. Alive. Everything else was fixable. In the other room, Vedrik's voice carried low and controlled. Dismantling. Restructuring. Building something different from the pieces. The way everything gets rebuilt. By hand. One component at a time. Patient enough to follow the path wherever it led. The two of them, the mute technician and the billionaire who demolished his home, were not the same. They would never be. But they were both still standing. In the same borrowed kitchen. At the start of whatever came next. And sometimes that is where chosen family begins. Not in a ceremony. Not in a grand moment. In the quiet after the worst morning of your life. When someone is still there. And you are still there. And the child in your lap is breathing. And the city outside keeps moving. And something, not everything, not all of it, not the apartment or the workbench or the 4 days of work on the radio board. But something real and solid held. That was enough. That had always been enough. It would be enough tomorrow. And the day after that. Because that was how it worked. Not in great gestures. In the steady, daily, unheroic act of choosing to keep going. Of building the next workbench from whatever door you found leaning against whatever dumpster was in front of you. Of tapping 3-2 on the doorframe so the child knows you're still there. But Kaiven sat there a little longer. Long enough to let the morning fully arrive. Long enough to watch the light change from gray to something closer to gold. He thought about the router. That $22 refurbished device. Set up so people in the building could get online. Because it was the right thing. Because he had something small to give and he gave it. That choice, that quiet, ordinary, unremarkable choice had changed everything. An empire had been framed against it. A child had almost been used as collateral against it. An 8-year operation had been dismantled through the logs it carried. He thought about that. About how often the small things turn out to be the load-bearing ones. The $30 repair. The open network. The cardboard note held up in a demolished room. The tap pattern on a doorframe that said I'm here. None of it was grand. None of it was designed to matter beyond the next hour. It mattered anyway. He looked at Rilo. The child had fallen asleep again. Head on his chest. Stuffed wolf tucked under one arm. The small, perfect weight of someone who trusted without condition. In the other room, Vedrik's voice carried low and controlled. He was building something. Different from what came before. Smaller, probably. Less invisible. More honest about what it was. The way things get rebuilt when you finally understand what the original structure was actually for. The two of them, the mute technician and the billionaire who demolished his home, were not the same. They would never be. The distance between their lives before this week was not closed by a sniper's miss or a shared night of work or a child walking across rubble toward danger without fear. Distance like that doesn't close. But it can narrow. One honest sentence at a time. One piece of cardboard at a time. One small moment where someone chooses to stay in the room instead of walking out of it. And sometimes that is where chosen family begins. Not in a ceremony. Not in a declaration. In the quiet after the worst morning of your life. When someone is still there. And you are still there. And the child in your lap is breathing. And the city outside keeps moving. And something, not everything, not all of it, but something real, held. That was enough. That had always been enough. This story is finished. But if it found you at the right moment, If Kaiven's silence spoke louder than anything, then you know what to do. Subscribe to this channel right now. Turn on the notification bell. Every single week, a new story comes to this channel. Stories about people who were overlooked, people who were used as pawns, people who were counted out before they even knew they were in the game, and rose anyway, because invisible does not mean powerless, because broken does not mean done, because the quietest person in the room is sometimes the one who changes everything. Drop a comment below right now. Tell me which moment in this story stopped you. Tell me what Kaiven's silence reminded you of in your own life. Tell me who you're thinking of while you watch this. Your comment might be the thing the next person reads before they decide to keep going. Share this story with someone today. Someone who needs to be reminded that the things they built with their hands have value even when someone drives a machine through the wall. Someone who needs to hear that invisible is not the same as powerless. Someone who needs Rilo walking across rubble without fear. Subscribe, comment, share. Because some stories don't just entertain. They remind you who you are.